So the first time, I didn't cook it long enough, and nothing thickened, and it was this whole big thing. It was after I'd thrown the first attempt away and was cooking the custard for the second time, stirring, staring into the pot, trying to spot thick, that I found myself giggling, thinking about how I was making 3 cake icings before 11 in the morning to ice a cake which I would then be taking with me onto a nationally broadcast financial news show. I was doing all of it with pink eye, and I was getting out of my secretarial job to do it, which made it both the best day I've had all week and an ending no one could have invented for my blog or for me a year ago. A perfect ending. A fairy tale one, even. And it was only then that I had my third response to Isabel and her email. What was I, the woman with the plan? I was not exactly as if I told my friends and family, hey, I'm going to cook my way through an old French cookbook, and when it's done, I'll have figured out what to do with the rest of my life. And then I'll just sat back with a sigh of relief thinking, well, I'm so glad Julie has got it all figured out. Sensible girl, that Julie. Who was I to judge somebody else's navigation? Was I some kind of existential backseat driver? I mean, who exactly did I think I was, anyway? I was interviewed on CNN FN by 3 women anchors, all at once, all of them gobbling up my cake at the same time they were interrogating me, so that I didn't get a single bite myself. It was disconcerting. One of the things they were really curious about was how much weight I'd gained, which is kind of an insulting thing to be asking about on national television, but understandable, I suppose. It's all about the French paradox, that much publicized puzzle of how French people eat all of that fatty food and drink tons of wine, yet still manage to be svelte and sophisticated. Not to mention cheese eating, surrender monkeys. Reasonable individuals quite naturally hope that there's a way to prove its existence scientifically to the immense benefit of mankind, while dried-up, self-righteous fascists hope there's a way to disprove its existence so they can go on feeling superior with their good war-fighting and or raw food-eating ways. Everyone's always looking for evidence, and I guess a project is sort of a naturally occurring laboratory test. But I would call the results inconclusive at best. Eric hasn't gained anything at all, skinny bastard that he is, but while I have not bloated to a New Yorker's Midwest airport nightmare proportions, neither would I call myself svelte or sophisticated. We both have a persistent corset-shaped ache cinched around our torsos. There have been some other unsuspected side effects, but I'm not sure how they affect the hypothesis. I don't believe the French are known worldwide for letting inch-thick layers of dust accumulate on every surface of their homes. I've also never heard that the French keep fleets of houseflies in their kitchens. And we were already cheese-eating surrender monkeys, so I guess we weren't really the ideal test subjects on that count. Also, the tendency we had to eat 4 helpings of things and drink, in addition to wine, entirely too many gimlets, may have polluted the tests somewhat. Julia had always preached moderation, but if there's one thing this year has proven once and for all, it's that I have no talent at all for that particular virtue. I'm more sympathetic to JC's old running buddy Jacques Pepin on this. Moderation in all things, including moderation. And then the CNN effing ladies didn't give me my plate back, which kind of pissed me off. On the morning of the Sunday I was to serve the second to last meal of the project, I began with petits chaussons à Roquefort, pastry turnovers with Roquefort cheese. The pastry was made the normal way, as I have made it perhaps 36 times in the last years. The weather had taken a turn for the better, with a small injection of cool in the air, a small extraction of moisture, and this helped the pastry turn out this penultimate time perfectly. While it was resting, I made the filling by mashing together a half-pound of Roquefort, a stick of softened butter, 2 egg yolks, pepper, chives, and, oddly, I thought, kirsch. Then I rolled out the dough. Moderate though the day was, preheating the oven had gotten the kitchen a little hot and bothered. So I had to work quickly. I cut the dough out into roughly 2.5-inch squares, put a little dollop of filling in the middle, painted the edges with some beaten egg, and sealed them together with my fingers. There was something about all of this familiar work. The kneading and rolling and flouring, the book beside me, Julia in my head, chortling quietly to herself like a roosting pigeon in its cote. Something about all of the checks on all of these recipes, on these 684 yellowed pages, 519 black checks, 5 left to be made. It made me philosophical, or maybe just hungry. I'd eaten nothing but what Roquefort filling I could suck off my fingers. Anyway, as I was stuffing and sealing turnovers, I found myself considering the essential rites of Roquefort filling. I had brought the filling into being, and now I was seeking to entrap it in buttery pastry prison. Though it was obvious from its invasive behavior that there was nothing Roquefort wants more than to be free. Was this not arrogance? Was this not, in essence, a slave-owning mentality to be approaching this from the perspective of how best to trap Roquefort filling without consideration for the Roquefort's fundamental desire for freedom? I was getting a little dizzy. In retrospect, of course, this can be recognized as the first sign of my imminent psychotic break. I managed to get the turnovers made, though the pastry dough is getting sticky fast. Some of the turnovers are not pretty. I throw them into the oven anyway, my head spinning. I've got spots before my eyes, except they're not spots. They're flies. Hundreds of them. They're everywhere. While the turnovers bake, I position myself in the middle of the kitchen like Gary Cooper with a fly swatter, my body like a coiled spring ready to kill. But they are too fast for me, and too many. For every fly that falls, fluttering to the floor, 2 more take its place. Discouraged, I turn to the dishes. This, too, is a loser's game because, well, there's so fucking many of them. Several days' worth. And the water doesn't want to drain in the sink, probably because of the accumulated sludge down in the drain catch. I take out the Roquefort turnovers, and they look okay. I stuff one into my mouth, not realizing, until I feel a tingling throb that starts in my mouth and travels ahead of the searingly hot, but actually quite delicious, masticated knob of Petit Chachons au Roquefort down my throat, into my stomach, that I'm not just hungry, I'm starving. Ignoring the blisters rising on the roof of my mouth, I quickly gobble down another turnover. I figure the least I can do while waiting for the sink to finish draining is to put away the dry dishes waiting on the dish rack. I start putting up plates and utensils and measuring spoons. The flies seem especially thick in the air around the sink. I notice, too, a moldy sort of odor, which doesn't particularly surprise me. I peer down into the shallow puddle that's collected in the plastic tray under the dish rack, which can get a little scummy. And it is that. I can't remember the last time I washed it, so I fold up the metal rack and pick up the tray so I can wash it in the bathtub. As I'm turning to go to the bathroom, a tiny movement catches my eye. I look down at the counter where the drip pan has been sitting. The origin of the legion of flies becomes nauseatingly clear. What? Eric, who spent the whole morning and into the afternoon cleaning the house, dashes into the kitchen, where he finds me, pale as a ghost, eyes like saucers, the drip pan held from my body with one hand, pointing with a shaking finger at the counter. What's the matter? Oh. So what exactly does one do when faced with a thriving colony Maggots right under the dishwasher. I mean, shoot up quickly. After that, we pretty much went about our business. Awful as it was, this wasn't quite as traumatic as it might have been for other people, because after a year of this, part of you just assumes there's going to be them somewhere around. We did break into occasional spasmodic shudders, and sometimes threw utensils from our hands in sudden panic upon imagining the creeping, burrowing sensation. We had that much humanity left in us anyway. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Even leaving aside for the moment the insect larvae now bravely facing their hideous fate in the pool of bleach in the sink, the kitchen was absolutely disgusting. Dabs of butter stuck to the side of the fridge, various meat juices splattered in violent arcs across the walls, layers of doughy, buttery, dusty, cat-hairy crap on every surface. I would be making the pastries for the pâté de canard en croûte in the food processor, and if Julia didn't like it, well then, balls to her. In 30 hours' time, this would be over, and she and I could just go our separate ways. I threw the flour and salt and sugar into the Cuisinart, plus a half a cup of chilled shortening and a cut up stick of butter, and ran the thing briefly to cut the fat in. Then I added the 2 eggs and some cold water and combined. The dough was too dry, it wasn't sticking together. I added some more water, no change. I dumped it into my marble pastry board, but might very well have trace elements of other things on it. I added cold water in drops, then tablespoons, then rivers. The dough was going straight from floury heap to melted butter puddle. I began to burble. In simple confusion at first, then increasing desperation, and then at last in incoherent existential rage. Eric was beside me, peering down at the mess. Is it too hot in here? Too hot? Too hot? You idiot! I threw granules of dry dough about in a blind fury. Damn this pastry dough. Fuck it. 364 days and I can't even make pastry dough? What? This whole thing was fucking pointless. Eric said nothing. What was there to say, really? He went back to his vacuuming, as cavernous, dry sobs issued from a hopeless hollow in my chest. I threw away the dough and started again. I made it by hand this time, and it was still too damned dry. But I squeezed the stuff together until it kind of really just barely stuck together. I twisted it up in tight plastic wrap. I had the hiccups. I had to go lie down. I woke up an hour later. The kitchen, the whole apartment sparkled. Well, that's not true. But the difference was remarkable. Eric was on the couch reading The Atlantic, munching a Roquefort turnover. Feeling better? He asked, when I came around the corner into the living room, looking pretty wobbly, I imagine. Yeah, even I hate myself when I use that pathetic whine. Thank you for the house. I love you. I love you too. Dispensing with guilt is a multi-billion-dollar industry, but I don't think it's such a bad thing to have, really. Not if you deserve it. Like on the second to last day of a year of torture imposed on the man you love, you scream and throw things and call him an idiot, which isn't true at all. And if instead of slamming the front door in your face and seeking out comfort in the arms of Michel Hussein, he cleans the house while you take a nap, this guilt, mingled as it is with gratitude like a pain and a sudden, ineffably sweet recognition of your unbelievably good fortune, is not only good for you, it's also delicious. I straddled him, kissed him, nuzzled down the crook of his neck, crumpling up his Atlantic as I did. I really love you. You love me, who loves you. We just sat together for a little bit. I lifted my head off his shoulders, blew some air noisily through my lips. So, he gave my rump a brisk pat. What do we do now? The answer was unbelievably, frighteningly, except it wasn't. Unbearably frightening, except it wasn't. Because look who I was sitting on top of. The guy who makes sure none of this is unbearable. Not ever. So I took another healthy, strengthening breath and stood and said, now I will bone the duck. Well, good luck with that, Eric replied before opening his creased Atlantic and hiding himself behind it. I returned to my newly deloused kitchen. Eric had wiped down the counters and placed a book squarely in the center of it. The book's poor spine had cracked several times, and I had reformed the exact triage with packing tape. In the ensuing months, it had gotten grimier and grimier, so that beneath the clear tape was preserved evidence of an earlier, brighter phase in the book's existence. I rifled through the pages, past check marks and stains and water-rippled pages, others stuck together with who knows what, until I got to the pâté de canard el croûte, boned stuffed duck baked in pastry crust. I'll leave you to contemplate for a moment. If you have your own copy of MTAOFC, open it to page 571, peruse the recipe, all 5 pages of it. The drawings, particularly, there are 8 of them, are enlightening, terrifying, but enlightening. Okay, Julie, you can do this. Did you say something, honey? You okay? Poor Eric. Imagine what it must be like sitting out there, waiting for the inevitable first whimper of distress, knowing where it will all go from there. Huh? No, nothing. I'm fine. The knife drawer slid smoothly on its tracks, and I peered in, like a malevolent dentist examining his instruments before removing the Japanese boning knife I had bought just for this event. It had never before been used. Its blade gleamed in the kitchen's gloom, for the fluorescent light in the kitchen, oh, best beloved, had declined to come on for the second to last day of the project, and sounded a tiny snick as I placed it down beside the cutting board. Next, I removed the duck from the fridge, unwrapped it, and cleaned it over the sink. After making extra sure that the sink no longer had either dirty dishes or anything else in it, of course, setting aside the neck and excess fat and liver and gizzards and 2 hearts and the heart like half a gizzard, I dried the bird with paper towels and set it on the board, breast down. I took the knife up in my left fist before bending my head to the book. You may think that boning a fowl is an impossible feat if you have never seen it done or thought of attempting it. Another good cleansing breath. Although the procedure may take 45 minutes the first time because of fright, it can be accomplished in not much more than 20 on your second or third try. No fear, Julie, no fear. The important thing to remember is that the cutting edge of your knife must always face the bone, never the flesh, thus you cannot pierce the skin. I twisted a kink out of my neck. Hun, you sure you're okay? Eric's concerned voice came to me as if from a great distance. Oh, fine. The knife hung poised over the duck's pale, bumpy flesh. To begin with, cut a deep slit down the back of the bird from the neck to the tail. I made the first incision, a deep slice down into the backbone. Slowly, I began to scrape the meat away from the bone, down one side. When I got to the wing and leg, I separated the bone at the joint and the wing attached to the skin, just as Julia instructed. Then back up along the breastbone, I scraped, the Japanese boning knife sliding through the flesh with terrifying precision. You must be careful here, as the skin is thin and easily slit. I slowed my breathing as if trying to go into hibernation. I forced myself to move slowly. Once I got into the ridged breastbone, I stopped and performed the same operation on the duck's left side. You will wonder how in the world there's any sense to be made of this. Did you say something, sweetie? What? The kitchen was still quite hot. I wiped my damp forehead with the back of my hand before touching the tip of my knife to that fragile juncture of cartilage and skin at the breastbone. Nothing, sorry. One more careful slit and I'm done. Oh, that was a breeze. The day before, I'd made the pâté my duck suite was to be stuffed with. It was just ground veal and pork mix chopped with pork fat, onions that had been minced and sautéed in butter, and Madeira that had been cooked down in the same pan, some egg, salt, pepper, allspice, thyme, and a clove of crushed garlic. Hardly worth mentioning at this late stage in the game. This stuff I mounded up into the duck suite lying splayed across the cutting board. After that, it was just a matter of sewing it up. When I got out to buy my glittery, deadly Japanese boning knife, I'd also picked up some poultry lacers, which sounded like just the thing for lacing up poultry, don't you think? They even came with the twine included. I was a little bit concerned though, because these poultry lacers thingies, rather than ending with eyes on their non-business ends, just curled into a biggish loop. Maybe a little more than half a dime in diameter, the tail of which did not quite meet the shaft of the needle. Actually, they looked a lot like the metal things we'd had scattered around the kitchen for years. We called them skewers. And lost all the time, because they were so small. And lots of times they'd slip through the bars of our dishwashing rack and fall into the sink. Stinking muck that was always building in the drip pan. And you didn't really want to use them after that. How was I supposed to know you used them to sew up a duck?